Hi, Councillor Freight. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order a special council meeting of Monday, November 10th, 2025. Please, never mind, no anthem. All right. Niagara Region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendurong, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest? Seeing none, can I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor DeFlavio, second by Councillor DeVoli. Moved by Councillor DeFlavio, second by Councillor DeVoli. Resolved that the agenda for the November 10th, 2025 special council meeting be approved. All in favor? And that's carried. Before we get to the budget presentation, I would like to take note that the budget was made available to the public on November 5th. The presentation will be added to the agenda tomorrow as an appendix to the staff report. Council members can ask questions and make statements, but there will be no debate or amendments to the budget this evening. Tony, welcome. Go ahead to the podium.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be here tonight to present the 2026 budget. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of what I'll be going over. Next slide. The purpose of any municipal budget is to advance Council's priorities, so I'd like to quickly remind everyone what those are. Council set a vision and plan for Grimsby to be an innovative, vibrant community where people and the environment matter. Next slide. That vision was broken down into 3 key priorities of people, places, and prosperity. The 2026 budget was compiled with these priorities in mind. Long-term goals can't be accomplished overnight, but progress can be made one budget at a time. Next slide. Some great strides have been made during this term of council to advance the town's budget timelines. Shown here on this slide is a summary of the timelines for this year's budget. Budget adoption will be advanced by at least 2 months compared to last year. This will allow the town to have a budget approved and in place before the start of the coming year. This is also the first budget for the town under the new strong mayor powers. After today, Council will have the opportunity to submit amendments to the budget. A special council meeting has been set for November 24th to consider and approve any such amendments. The mayor will then have until December 1st to veto any approved amendment. And Council does have the ability to override a mayoral veto, provided that there is a 2/3 majority support by Council. After the process is complete, the budget is deemed to be adopted as amended. Slide. Municipal budgets are made up of 2 key parts, the operating budget and the project budget. The operating budget provides for the annual funding to deliver ongoing programs and services. It covers the calendar year from January to December, and net budget expenses are recovered from the tax levy or from water wastewater rates as appropriate. The project budget relates to time-limited works and initiatives with beginning and ends. Things like the replacement of existing assets and new infrastructure. Projects are funded from our reserves, so any changes to the project budgets will not have a direct impact on the tax increase that is proposed in the operating budget. As mentioned, projects are funded from reserves, which have various funding sources. We have capital asset management reserves that are used to fund capital needs related to asset renewal and replacement. These are funded from contributions from the tax levy, contribution from the water wastewater rates, as well as senior government grants. We also have stabilization and contingency reserves used to fund one-time or unexpected costs that have not been budgeted for. The funding for sources for special purpose reserves, such as development charge reserves or the election reserve, can vary depending on the type of reserve. Next slide. I'd like to go over some key considerations and financial pressures that formed this year's budget. The budget's a balancing act, and inherent in the annual process are the expectations of delivering an affordable budget while maintaining service level standards in the midst of a changing external environment. The 2026 budget was prepared using a holistic approach, taking into account these pressures while aligning to the town's long-term financial plans and policies. Next slide. This slide provides an overview of some of the key factors that shape this budget. $60,000 has been added to the budget for pending debt obligations related to the PKC project. This will bring our total set aside for debt payments to $444,000. Next year, the region will be issuing the debenture on our behalf, and after that point, we'll know exactly how much the debt payments will be and how much more we'll need to set aside. We expect that to be another $80,000, which would be reflected in the 2027 budget. Federal and provincial funding is not constant and does fluctuate. For 2026, we have seen reductions in grant funding that we'll be receiving. Our OSIF allocation used to fund capital infrastructure replacement is being reduced by $160,000 in 2026, and our OMPF operational funding of $24,000 per year is gradually being phased out by 2030. Earlier this year, Council adopted or approved the latest iteration of the town's asset management plan. There's currently a funding gap of $5 million between what is being contributed to reserves versus what should be contributed annually. Provisions have been made in this year's budget to make progress towards closing that gap. We're a Schedule II WSIB employer, meaning that we self-fund claims as they arise, and we need to start building a sufficient budget in order to fund these costs. Growth in our assessment helps spread the cost of tax increases over a larger base. This year, however, our assessment base has only grown by 0.3%, limiting our ability to offset increases. As a service-based organization, people are key to delivering customer service and form the biggest part of our operating expenses. Next slide. Okay, I'd like to get into the details now. The proposed 2026 tax levy increase is 4.7%, which represents an increase of $70 for the year, or 19 cents a day for the average assessed property. To help mitigate some of the budget pressures identified, we've been able to offset some of those impacts with increases to revenues related to PKC rentals and programming. With the reopening of the facility, we expect this to be very well used, with many revenue-generating activities taking place. The newly renovated PKC will also be bringing in $100,000 in sponsorship revenue each year, which has now been added to the budget in full to help mitigate this year's increase. Next slide. Here's an overview of the primary drivers. Base operations refers to costs to maintain services at existing service levels. They relate primarily to salary, wages, and benefits for staff, along with other inflationary impacts. I've already touched on the debt requirements for the PKC. And with respect to budget enhancements, these items are recommended to help secure the financial health of the town and reduce financial risk. You can think of asset management reserves as the town's savings account. Contributing more to asset management reserves now helps reduce the need for debt and the interest costs that come with it, and ensures capital assets can be replaced when needed so as not to affect service levels. More on this in a bit. WSIB funding will help reduce the risk of claim costs for existing and future claims that may arise, and I'll speak more to this in a bit also. I want to highlight several proposed changes in the community services area that net out to a small savings. With the expanded PKC opening, there will be more going on at the facility, which requires more staffing. Additional part-time hours of $185,000 are proposed to be added to the budget to ensure the newly renovated and expanded facility can function to its full potential. Non-staff expenses relate to things such as more cleaning, maintenance, and utility costs. To offset that, we've increased the budget for programming revenues and space rentals that those staff would be supporting. Cutting back on staff would mean cutting back on revenue-generating activities. Sponsorship revenue is also helping to offset cost increases. So much has been spent on this great new facility, and we want it to be open as much as possible so the community can realize the full benefit. Next slide. Our overall changes to our staff complement are summarized here on this slide. We discussed the PKC part-time hours, so I'll talk about the IT help desk support. Adding a permanent IT support position would enable dedicated services to both the Grimsby Public Library and the town. This role would allow existing IT staff to shift their focus to critical areas such as network infrastructure and cybersecurity. And this position is funded by savings in IT contracted services and repurposing of a vacant part-time library IT position. Our temporary bylaw officer position is currently in place until the end of this year. With ongoing increases in enforcement activity and a broader range of investigations, it's recommended that this position be converted to permanent full-time status. Converting the role to permanent status will provide stability, strengthen the bylaw enforcement function, and ensure adequate staffing to meet service demands. Pending this approval, the bylaw team will consist of 1 supervisor and 2 enforcement officers. Revenues and expenses associated with the position were already included in last year's budget, so there's no levy impact this year. Next slide. Here's an estimated summary of the overall tax impact with estimates for region and education taxes built in. You see the town's share by the green arrow on the bottom right, 4.7%. We've made some assumptions with respect to the region budget, which has yet to be presented. Based on these assumptions, the overall property tax increase becomes 6.57%, or $379 once the region and education impacts are factored in. I'd like to point out that starting in 2026, there will no longer be a wastewater levy on the tax bill. This slide is an apples-to-apples comparison showing what the 2026 versus 2025 taxes are without the wastewater levy factored in. Next slide. Last year, the average assessed property paid $427 for wastewater services as part of their tax bill. And with the shift, with 100% of the wastewater charges now recovered on the water bill, property owners will actually experience a drop in their tax bill pending what the region ends up landing on. Next slide. Property taxes are a combination of levies imposed by 3 different jurisdictions. The town bills for and collects property taxes on behalf of all 3. We don't control the regional or educational share because they pass their own budgets. The taxes paid by residents and businesses are not levied in equal proportion by each jurisdiction. As you can see from the graph, the region taxes account for 64% of the overall property tax bill. Education taxes account for another 11%, and the town controls only 25% of the property tax bill. The percent tax increases for each jurisdiction are not simply added on top of each other. They need to be weighted by the amount of tax dollars imposed by each jurisdiction to come up with the overall impact. Since regional taxes carry more of a proportional weight, decisions made at the regional level end up impacting taxpayers more. Hopefully this slide helps to explain. The region's estimated tax increase of 8.58% carries the greatest weight at about 2/3 of the total taxes payable. That equates to 5.5% of the total 6.6 increase. The town's local increase of 4.7% only carries a 25% weight, which represents only 1.2 of the overall estimated increase. So adjustments we make at the town level have limited overall impact. I'd like to shift gears a bit and talk about the project budget now. As mentioned earlier, in addition to our operating budget, which funds ongoing expenses that occur each year, we have time-limited projects, and we break these out into two types, operating projects and capital projects. This slide summarizes the operating projects. Operating projects do not result in capital assets. They typically relate to studies, assessments, or long-term plans. Since these projects are funded from reserves, changes to these project budgets will not have an impact on the proposed property tax or rate increases. Starting on page 143 of Budget Book Appendix D, you'll see individual summaries of each operating project. Some key projects relate to records management, cybersecurity assessments, and follow-up studies related to the official plan. Next slide, please. The 2026 capital program is a significant investment for the town at $20 million. These projects are funded from reserves, development charges, and grants, the funding of which do not impact the tax levy directly. The biggest project, which makes up a third of this year's capital budget, relates to wastewater inflow and infiltration work we have planned to prevent stormwater runoff from entering the wastewater system. This important project will help reduce our share of flows into the regional treatment system, thereby reducing our share of the costs. I'm happy to say that the town applied for and was successful in securing a $7.1 million provincial grant, which is funding the majority of the project. Other notable projects include $1.9 million for replacement of the PKC refrigeration plant to a modern, safer system, improving efficiency and eliminating risks associated with the existing ammonia-based system. And $1.8 million for Whitaker Park and 40 Mile Creek Park improvements to improve the design and amenities of the park. For a full listing of projects and project summaries, see page 159 of Appendix D. A 9-year capital forecast has also been included as part of the 2026 budget. The slide gives you a sense of the volume of work planned over the next 10 years. Two of the biggest proposed projects relate to growth-related infrastructure, $14 million for a new fire station in 2030, and $10 million for a new or expanded library in 2029. Now, this forecast is included for information only. Actual timing may vary, and funding approvals will be required to be brought before council each year. Earlier this year, council approved a capital financing policy for the town to promote its long-term financial health. The basic principles of the policy is that growth should pay for growth, debt should be used to fund special projects, and reserves should be used to fund ongoing asset replacement. Based on our capital asset reserve position, we'll likely need to fund some asset replacement via debt in the medium term, but it's important we continue to strengthen our transfers to reserves so that we don't become overly reliant on debt. Next slide. So this slide provides a projection of our reserve balances. These reserves are a funding source for replacement and renewal of $1.2 billion worth of town capital assets. So it's important we keep an eye on their long-term viability. This slide relates to all our reserves. Most of the balances are made up of our water wastewater reserves, which are in relatively good shape. Next slide. This slide focuses on our capital asset management reserves when the water wastewater reserves are removed. Last year, council approved a $178,000 increase to these reserve contributions to begin to address funding gaps. And this year, we're proposing an additional $190,000 as part of this year's budget for increased contributions to capital asset reserves. The red bars show what our projected reserve balances would be without continued annual increases to our contributions, and the green bars show what the reserve projections could be with continued annual increases of about 1% of the levy. By adding to our reserves via regular dedicated savings, we'll reduce our need for debt and the interest costs that come with it. We shouldn't view this as an expense, but rather as an investment in ourselves. Next slide. As can be seen, reserve contributions have not materially increased over recent years. The green represents contributions we levy for, and the blue represents outside funding we get from senior levels of government. The dotted line represents what we should be contributing annually to be sustainable. In this example, we've assumed continued increases of 1% of the levy per year to our capital asset reserves. We'll likely need to make contributions in excess of 1% in certain years to continue to make progress. Now, we're not alone in this regard. All municipalities are facing these infrastructure deficits to one degree or another. Federal and provincial support is lacking and needs to increase. So certainly more advocacy is warranted and more support from higher levels of government is needed in this area. To help illustrate, this slide represents the gains we could make in closing the gap if senior levels of government committed to matching our town funding. With 1% increases coupled with matching funding, we would make tangible strides to achieving long-term sustainability. Funding of our WSIB expenses is another area of financial risk that needs to be considered. The town is a Schedule II WSIB employer, meaning we self-fund claim expenses. However, we don't currently have a budget in place to pay for such claims. Our current claim levels are at about $200,000 per year, but new claims can arise and we're at risk of having to pay for larger, serious claims, especially as it relates to firefighters. We're proposing to add $100,000 to our budget to help address these existing claims. To reduce long-term risk, it would be in our best interest at some point to consider switching and becoming a Schedule I employer. This would mean paying annual premiums to WSIB in exchange for claims coverage. Even if we were to switch to Schedule I, we'd still be responsible for paying for existing legacy claims until they expire. Next slide. Now, this slide presents a possible approach we could take to switch to Schedule I sooner than later. It's a bit busy, so allow me to explain. So to change to Schedule I status, our WSIB premiums would be $420,000 per year. Now, adding that to the budget all at once would be cost prohibitive and would be akin to a 2.2% increase on the levy. So what we may want to consider instead is using our tax stabilization reserve to smooth out the tax impacts over several years. For example, we could enroll as a Schedule I employer, say in 2027, pay the premiums of $420,000, but only use $100,000 of levy dollars to pay for those premiums. We would use $320,000 from the stabilization reserve to fund the difference. Now, the next year, we would add another $100,000 of the levy and need to only use $220,000 in reserve funding. This would continue until 2030, when we'd have full funding in place in our operating budget to pay for the annual premiums and wouldn't need to rely on the stabilization reserve anymore. If we were to take such an approach, we'd be able to switch to Schedule I status earlier, in this example, 2027, reduce our risk, and use reserve funding to smooth out the tax impacts. Now, this is only a proposed plan. Given the multi-year nature of this plan and the financial implications out to 2030, this may be better left as a decision for the next council to determine. As for the 2026 budget, we're only proposing to add $100,000 to the budget to help pay for current claim costs. Next slide. Okay, turning to water, wastewater rates. Starting in 2026, costs for water and wastewater will be recovered entirely from the water bills. The move brings us in line with best practices used by the rest of Ontario municipalities and provides greater equity and fairness in how we recover our water, wastewater expenses. All property owners will pay based on water meter size and amount of water used. Because part of the wastewater costs were recovered from taxes, and taxes are apportioned based on assessed value, the reduction in taxes and the change in water bills for 2026 will be different for all. To help people understand their own impact, we have a calculator on our website that people can use to estimate what their water bills will look like going forward. And this calculator is now up and running on our Let's Talk Grimsby page. Meter size will determine the fixed charge to be applied. This is a widely accepted practice to have fixed costs escalating based on meter size. The smallest meter size at the top typically applies to residential properties. Customers with larger water meters will pay a larger fixed charge. In addition to these fixed costs, customers pay a consumption rate based on the amount of water used, as shown at the bottom of the slide. We'll also be implementing a new billing cycle once every 2 months instead of once every 4. This will mean people will get more frequent smaller bills rather than infrequent large ones that can be harder to manage. This slide shows the charges people will see on their water bills compared to now. The year-over-year increase works out to 8% for the average assessed property with 200 cubic meters of consumption. Historically, we've apportioned water wastewater costs 50-50 between fixed charges and consumption charges. We're proposing to shift the allocation to 60% based on consumption. This has the effect of reducing the fixed charges and increasing the variable rates. Having a rate structure that's tilted more to usage helps to promote water conservation and allows property owners more ability to control and manage their own costs. This slide provides a sample of what different types of residential properties would be paying for the year. The amount of increase on the water bill won't necessarily be the same as the reduction on the tax bill. Again, I encourage everyone to use the calculator on our website to estimate their new bills. It's a great tool to help you better plan for what to expect and understand how consumption ties to your bill. The pie on the left shows our total water wastewater operating budget, $19 million, and the costs are split about 50-50 town and region. But when you look at the pie on the right, you see that 80% of the 2026 rate budget increase relates to expected regional budget increases for treatment costs. Region treatment costs are projected to go up by 9% from 173 to 189 million, and our share of that increase has been estimated at 1.14 million, making up 80% of the year-over-year increase we're experiencing with the rate budget, as illustrated on the right. Next slide. Okay, I'd like to close by reviewing our tax and rate competitiveness with our regional neighbors. So this slide provides a comparison of our water and wastewater rates. Our 2025 and 2026 rates are shown in green, compared to the other Niagara municipalities' 2025 rates shown in blue. In 2025, we were below the regional average, and I expect we will continue to be once others pass their 2026 rates. Next slide. This slide provides a 2025 tax comparison. We're currently second lowest in the region. And if we don't remain second lowest, I expect we'll remain on the lower end of 2026 based on what's proposed. Again, pending what others pass. Next slide. So I'd like to conclude with a reminder of the timelines and next steps. November 18th is the deadline for proposed budget amendments, with November 24th scheduled as a special council meeting to go over any amendments. Next slide. So I want to thank Council for the opportunity to present this budget today. I feel we have before you a fiscally responsible budget that supports a healthy community and promotes collective prosperity. Before I end, I do want to give a big thank you to the corporate leadership team and my finance team that worked tirelessly behind the scenes to help bring this budget to fruition. Well, thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments you may have at this time.
Thank you for your presentation, Tony. Can I have a mover and seconder to get the 2026 consolidated budget on the floor for discussion? Councillor Howe and Councillor Charwa. Moved by Councillor Howe, second by Councillor Charwa. Are there any questions or comments from Council? Councillor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. So you said we're not discussing it, we're just asking questions tonight because I don't want to break the rules. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So First one, the 4%, 4.7% levy increase, is that calculated after the wastewater is removed? And if so, what would the actual increase be then? Because, I mean, I think the honest way to talk about the increase is to deduct that wastewater from the tax bill and then explain the bill. So could we get that number?
Yeah, so through the mayor, that 4.7% is with having the wastewater levy removed already. So the 2025 town taxes in 2025 without the wastewater levy were 1,496. What's proposed for 2026 is 1,566. That's a $70 increase, which works out to 4.7%. So we're comparing apples to apples. We're not including the wastewater levy when we're looking back at last year.
Through you, Mayor. Thanks. Just so that I can make myself clear, and I don't want to be debating. It's just if the levy's coming off, if the wastewater levy's coming off, then it should come off. That's the new tax, right? And then the percentage should be calculated based on that. So I would just like to know what the actual percentage is after we take that wastewater levy off, because we're moving that to a different column. It's not really being removed from the tax bill. It's being added to the water bill. So, and again, I'm trying not to debate. I just want to clarify my position so I can get the answer that I'm looking for.
Yeah, so through the mayor, yeah, that 4.7% would be what the increase is. If you were to compare last year with the tax levy still in there, it would be a reduction. People would see a reduction in their taxes when they look at one year to the last. Okay.
If you give us 1 sec, we'll pull the slide. Do you have the slide?
Slide 19. Okay, thanks, yeah. And if you can make it bigger, yeah, great, okay. So yeah, so as you can see, so if you look at the light green line there, the town levy, the 1,566, that's the town taxes proposed. 2025, the 1,496, that's last year's taxes when you exclude the wastewater levy. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that in 2025, the town taxes were actually the 1,496 plus that 427 in blue for wastewater. So the total town taxes in 2025 was 1,923 because 427 of that was for wastewater. So, one way to look at it is that last year's taxes was 1,923, now we're going 1,566. But if you go back to this slide, comparing apples to apples, really it's 1,496 and 1,566 because we want to compare apples to apples. Hopefully that explains.
That's a great explanation. Thank you for that. Having not been part of the subcommittees that dealt with the WSIB issue, I'm just looking for further clarification on that because it seems like a really important discussion. I like your 4-year phased approach. I'm just trying to understand, in the past, was there no budgeting for WSIB at all within previous budgets? I know that because of the way that we were scheduled as an employer, we paid for them on a case-by-case basis, but was there no budget line for WSIB, and that's why we have to create a whole new budget line? And if you answered this, I apologize, I missed it, and I'm just trying to understand it better.
Yeah, through the mayor, no, and those are good questions. Yeah, so the only budget we have for WSIB currently is to pay for insurance against large claims. So we have about $100,000 budget for WSIB insurance that covers claims that would be in excess of $500,000, which is great. The problem is that that insurance does not cover firefighters, which are our biggest risk, right, at the town. And so with that being the only budget in place, when we have claims coming through of 200,000, sometimes in excess of that, depending on what medical claims are coming through as well, there's no budget to pay for those claims, and it ends up falling as a variance item, creating a deficit position or reducing our surplus.
Go ahead.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I just also wanted to note that we are the only municipality in the region that's Schedule 2 at this time. Everyone else has moved to Schedule 1, especially with the presumptive legislation with firefighters. We are now the last one to be still in Schedule 2, so we have to be responsible with our increasing risk to manage that in the next few years, for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, through you, Mayor. Sorry, I have a lot of questions. Oh, geez. Sorry about that. I've got to scroll. So we put out a budget survey. I think you said 135 responses in the report, I think I read. There was no mention of the budget survey in your presentation. So I'm always concerned if we put out a survey and don't use that to reflect, at least, I mean, you mentioned also that it could be skewed, it could be a very specific demographic that's responding, so I get all that. But I think it should at least be reflected. So can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of the survey, what people indicated in that survey? I think, did we ask about affordability in the survey, some of the questions that were asked and how people responded to them, you know, those kinds of things, if you don't mind just reflecting on that.
Yeah, thank you, through the mayor. Yeah, there is a summary of responses in Appendix E, I believe it is, of the survey. As the councillor mentioned, there was about 135 responses. About the same as last year. Some of the general takeaways are that they felt, most respondents felt that the town services met their expectations. Library and fire were two that actually exceeded people's expectations. A couple areas such as road maintenance and planning initiatives rated a little lower. There did seem to be some confusion about who provided what services, town versus region. There was a lot of comments about perhaps not being satisfied with things like waste management and transit, which isn't the town responsibility. There seemed to be, in some of the free-form questions that came through, so a common theme of wanting us to focus on our core services. There seemed to be an understanding that you know, it costs money to run the town, and people are willing to pay their fair share, but that they encourage the town to focus on core services. Maybe if I just switch to Schedule E just to remind myself. Yeah, there was, in terms of, you know, what the town should do with additional funds to invest, there did seem to be an understanding that asset management was important, and that it's an important area to invest additional funds. And, you know, areas like transparency and accountability rated high in terms of what they want out of the town. So, you know, we've been asking these similar questions for a few years now. Maybe it might be worth considering if these are really the questions we want to ask, or if there are better questions we could ask. I know some municipalities have kind of some interactive tools where they allow residents to kind of allocate budget dollars according to how they would like. I'm not sure how much would actually go into that, but maybe we could look at exploring some other avenues to help make it a little more relevant.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, thanks, Tony. My next question is related to bylaw enforcement, so I don't know, maybe our clerk can answer this question. How many, and this doesn't have to be answered tonight, if maybe we can get this information for a future meeting, because I'm trying to look at the number of bylaw complaints that were received in 2024 versus 2025, or previous to the new temporary hire compared to now, to kind of reflect on the need for expanded bylaw enforcement. So, you know, things like, are we seeing more serious or complex violations, or just higher volume? What percentage of enforcement actions stem from proactive patrol versus resident complaints? Because we traditionally were a complaint-based system, and I think we've moved to a more proactive approach. So how does that balance work out? And could we maintain service levels with part-time or seasonal enforcement support rather than permanent full-time positions, I guess? And I understand that this is not reflected in the levy, but it is a full-time versus temporary or part-time position. So I just, those, if somebody could kind of respond to that.
Yeah, through the mayor, I'll have the clerk respond as well. But I believe that part of the impetus of this is there's a broader range of investigations that are now under the purview of the bylaw team. But I will defer to Tori, or if we needed, we could take that back to look at some of those to help answer.
Through the chair, perhaps I'll take the statistics back and send that out via email, just because I think it's a little more complex to convey. I do have that information. I would agree with what Tony said. We do have a part-time, it started as a seasonal officer. It has since moved to, it's still seasonal but year-round officer. So this will be the third round of this contract, which is why we would like to make it a full-time position, because we're seeing the need. They're more complex cases, so we're seeing more property standards, we're seeing more clean yards and more sign issues. All of those are reactive, not proactive. And there is definitely an increase in our complaints. In addition, we have AMP starting up in March. And so again, those will just add to the revenues that are being collected in addition to more cases. And so by having, we're not actually, as you said, there's a part-time position right now. We're looking to make that full-time in order to address the caseload, which is really what's driving this request.
Last thing, oh, sorry.
Just if I can jump in on that too, certainly I know in the past bylaw was having difficulty finding a person that would take part-time work and be suitable to be an employee of the town of Grimsby. And moving this person who has a track record to full-time, I think is just a sensible thing to do.
Yeah, I get all that. I mean, it's, yeah, I don't, we've gone from one part-time shared staff 10 years ago to 3 staff in the bylaw enforcement department now, so that's a significant change in the way that we do business. But the last thing, I'll leave the rest of my, I've got a lot more, and I don't want to take up people's time. I'll leave it for our one-on-one discussions that are coming up this week. The last thing I want to mention, Mayor, and not, this is not a debate, it's just a point. We received this at 3:49 on Thursday afternoon. So 2 business days to reflect on a multi-hundred-page budget, I don't think is fair, frankly. So, I'll take more time and I'll give my feedback to staff when we meet one-on-one. But for the public, 2 business days to come and ask questions is not an adequate amount of time, in my opinion. So.
And And it came on Wednesday afternoon, not Thursday.
I got the budget.
Councillor Sharp.
Through you, Chair, thank you. Thank you for this, Tony. Just wondering, because I know as a counselor, the main question I get asked is about our taxes, and I have to constantly tell people 25% of our property taxes are the town of Grimsby. If you have issues, direct them to Niagara Region, because that's the majority of the taxes. I'm just wondering if you know of any other municipalities that actually have presentations at council to explain to residents the Niagara Regional portion, if there's a way that we can communicate that to residents.
Yeah, through the mayor, I know sometimes it could be difficult to try to understand the way things work from upper and lower tier. That's why we try to add this information into our inserts for tax and water bills to try to explain to people how things work, post some of this stuff on our website so they can understand, how that even though the bill comes from us, really it relates to the region, education, and the town. There's 3 jurisdictions that are on that bill, and we're actually a very small portion of that. So I think, yeah, there might be more that we need from a communications point of view to help educate and make people understand better. We do look and see what other municipalities do to kind of help with our own ideas and how we can convey that better.
Thank you. Yes, just to add on to that, if in communications there's a way to let people know what council members can do and, where to direct their questions or their concerns, because again, I don't have any say in the Niagara Regional budget. So if they know who their representatives are, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Howe.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. With Tony, if I can, and I'm thinking kind of down the road here, but when we're doing the budgets and we deal with the reserve funds but development charges, and here we've got Toronto, Queen's Park are talking about dropping or decreasing the development charges. Do we can get past this year, 26? If they do it, does that start to impact us in 27? Because it's going to be those are big infrastructure dollars that we're expecting them to reinvest into our community, but if it's not there.
Yeah, those are, through the mayor, those are good questions. I think there's still some unanswered questions out there. I think it was even addressed in the federal budget that there might be some sort of financial incentive for municipalities that reduce fees for development, but there would have to be some sort of other funding source, I suppose, to make that up for municipalities. Otherwise, the principle of growth, paying for growth, doesn't hold, and then that would end up being more of an impact on our existing residents, which is something we don't want. So there's been a lot of changes to the development charge regime in the last few years, and I think we'll have to see what actually comes out. I mean, it is a provincially legislated, the province determines how the development charges work. So we'll have to make sure that we keep abreast of the changing rules and see how it can best make it work for Grimsby.
Again, just continue. And we've talked about this at finance, but when we talk about the water bill, I know, and no, I don't get a million calls, but a couple of conversations. People are asking, the common question is, why don't we have them emailed? And I know that we've talked about this for, 3 years anyways, but can we expect that shortly?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, through the mayor. Yeah, that is something we want to turn our attention to in 2026. now that we've, as we start to turn the page to the water billing modernization and getting those bills out every other week, the next phase of that modernization project will be enabling some sort of e-billing option for residents. So we will be exploring that.
And this is not for Tony, but I think it's just kind of a statement on my part with our new system. And the vetoes, you get to that last line of veto that talks about 2/3. Remember, with a full table of council, and remember that the mayor has a voting that he can't hold back votes on it. So that total of 6 people have to support a veto to stop it. So, and I'm looking, and what kind of triggered it is, with the empty chairs, it becomes more a tighter number if someone's not there, if someone's not in the chair, if someone's not involved in it, if someone's not voting on the damn thing, then the number gets really small. So that's just my shot at, thank you.
Yeah, and just for clarification for the public, there is 2 people online, so we're only actually missing 1 counselor tonight. Counselor Vardy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just some general comments. 4.7 is too high. So I think that we need to do some work to bring that down. Ultimately, in some ways, I think, we sort of hide and say, oh, well, our portion is only this much, but there's only one taxpayer. And, their portion is going to be around, their taxes are going to go around 6 or 7%, right? The region's increase is quite high. I'm not sure if you have that slide, if it was 6.8%. But one thing I'm wondering about that would be good to know, what's our return on that investment in the region? So how much of that 6.8% that we give up are we getting back? So in service and whatever, because, for me, that's a question that always hangs out there. Are we getting our fair share of what we're paying into the region? And I think we need to explain that. Next, I think if we were planning for a 3rd fire station, if we weren't planning for a 3rd fire station, how would that impact our reserves? Maybe that's a question, Tony, you could answer.
Yes, through the chair, that the 3rd fire station has a projected cost of $14 million. Right now, that would be a growth-related station, so it would be funded from development charges. We would most likely have to issue debt for that amount and then recover that through development charges. That's the current plan as it is right now. That's also going to be relooked at once we redo the development charge study to see if 14 million is an appropriate number for that station.
So are you saying then that money's not coming out of reserves? That we're planning and using all of our development charges for the 3rd fire station for growth in that area? And I guess my question is, given that Fire Station 1 is the muster point, and when we have a fire, everyone has to go to Fire Station 1 to get their equipment on and then go out to a fire, how is Fire Station 3 really going to be that much of an asset? So I still don't quite get that. And the fact that we're still paying for Fire Station 2, I think that's something we need to have a look at. And I guess my final comment, and I think it's something that we need to do, is we need to do an assessment on how we can increase our revenues beyond just, what we collect from bylaw or what we collect from, our various charges. We need to really think about revenue generation, because these tax increases are just way too high. And it just becomes harder and harder to explain. So I don't know if you can tell me if anyone's giving any kind of attention to how we can increase our revenues.
Yeah, through the mayor. Yeah, I mean, it certainly does help when we're able to add some sponsorship revenues like we have this year for the PKC to help offset the budget increases. The 100,000 we're getting annually from that over the next 10 years is about 0.5% off the levy. So it definitely does help. I think we can learn a lot, and we will learn a lot as we go through and see how this works out in practice.
Okay, I think we really need to explain those kinds of things in our budget, because certainly when the taxpayer gets this bill, they're going to be looking at the most visible things and saying, it's so high because we have a PKC center and I don't even use it. So I think we're going to have to go, a long way to educate about the region and also what we get back from the region. And I guess my question to the mayor is, when you sat in on the regional budget discussions, did you vote for this budget?
We haven't got a final number yet. One of the difficulties that the region has right now is 92.8% of our costs are actual costs that were mandated at the region. So our costs we're trying to work with for anything above the mandated cost is actually just over 7.2%. So it puts, with the mandated costs from the province and federal costs, it puts the region in a very difficult spot right from the start.
Well, I think, again, we need to go a long way to educating the public about these numbers, and so that they can put the pressure where pressure is due. I mean, even if we, decrease ours, which I think we can, it's still, I think, worth the effort, so that people understand where this money is going. And, if these are mandated costs, from the province and the feds, then our taxpayer needs to know that. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Councillor DeVoldy.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. I think one of the traps that previous councils have fallen into for decades has always been that they have tried to minimize the amount of the tax impact to the ratepayers. But our asset management study was so revealing. And really what it told us was that trying to keep it down meant we don't have enough saved. And so last year, we put in a 1% infrastructure levy that was 178,000, 180,000 roughly. This year, we're adding to that, so it'll be the 178 plus approximately 190. But in 2025, we were short 5 million minus the 178. We now add to that this year's, which is 5 million minus 178 minus 190. So I don't have the numbers here in front of me or a calculator, but, we're short like 4.8 million from last year, and then we're going to add to that another, I'll say 4.6 million, and I'm rounding too high. So in 2 years, we are already short 9 million plus, right? And so I know we can sit here and say, well, 4.7 seems like too much. And I'm here to tell you, it should be higher. We are not saving enough. And the ramifications of that are that we are kicking this ball down the road. And I look around this table and I see many of us with teenagers, children who are teenagers, or young adults, or even adults who are in their 20s, 30s, and I'll say early 40s. And it's those folks who are going to be having to pay for these gaps. I'll be gone, but my children will be paying for it. And so it is really hard to sit here and say, we're going to have a tax increase. This tax increase even needs to be bigger. And the statistics tell us that the folks in my town, my neighbors, my friends, and so on, when you go to the Statistics Canada website and you look at things like the amount of income per household, the age per households, and so on, we are an affluent town. Yes, there are pockets of us that are not doing well, for sure. That's always the case. But by and large, we are a fairly affluent town, and we know how big that gap is, and we know that we're just barely scraping the surface of it. And so I feel a personal responsibility here to actually pay more. And I know that sounds so bizarre coming from an elected person, but it's not about getting reelected. It's about managing our finances wisely. It's about truly saving so that we have the money. And even then, we won't have all the money when the time comes to build fire stations, to expand libraries, to deal with the Casablanca and the work that has to be done there. We know that our development charges are going to be driven into the negative. What does that mean? That means we're borrowing, folks. We're going to be borrowing again, even to do some of those projects. So my concern truly is that we are not saving enough. And 4.7, I got to tell you, I look at the numbers and say it should probably be higher. I'm probably never going to convince everybody around this table that it should be. You know, those are hard things to do, but they are the right thing to do. I will leave it there. I would like to just also point out that the debenture on Fire Station 2, I believe 2027 is the last year for the payment. I see some nodding, yes. So we know that when those debt payments stop for Fire Station number 2, and I think they're $225,000, something like that per year, that will be freed up. I know we've kicked around ideas that it could also supplement the asset management deficiency, or it could, which means putting it into savings for the, I'll say either Fire Station 3 or a significantly enhanced Fire Station 1. And now we weigh that against the WSIB problem that we have. We have if I could just have one more minute, Mayor, we have a $1.4 million liability there already, for which we have saved nothing. We know that we are short every year what our actual costs are compared to what it is actually costing us.
I'll hold you right there, because I think we're going to go for a second round. I see Councillor Sharwal wants to speak again. So why don't you save that for your 3 minutes?
I could. Okay, thank you very much.
Just to further to your comments about our asset management deficit, I think we have to look at where we came from. I think we have to look at the previous councils where several years we had a 0% increase, or even in 2012 we had a 4.97 decrease. And we're behind on our asset management because we didn't even go for the cost of living. And that has put us behind in asset management, lower in reserves than we would be today if we took a little bit. And no one remembers what their rebate was when it went down 4.97%. All right, next. If no one's going for the first round, Councillor Frake.
Sorry, Mayor, I can't turn on the video, but I guess you can hear me okay. Is that right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I tend to agree with a lot of the comments that have been made so far. I mean, any tax increase obviously is too much. We are fortunate as a town to have a lot of great assets. However, I think in the past we've been very remiss in any time we invest in any type of project. I would refer to the Peach King Center particularly. We spent $42 million in the Peach King Center. We all keep talking about return on investment. I don't know what the return on investment is in the Peach King Center. Even though it's a great building, it's going to be great for the town. But I look around the town, and if you do a survey of the town, how many people use that facility? Maybe 5% of the population of Grimsby use that facility. So the other 95%, they're not getting much return on their investment, that's for sure. So when we're looking at assets and building things, the first question we should ask is what kind of a payback is it going to give us? And we don't do that. And that's where we made the mistake over the years, and I think that's why we are where we're today. If we don't have an asset like that that's not paying its way, we shouldn't be doing it. Simple as that. There are things, of course, that we're not going to get any payback on, like a fire station, for example. These types of things. But if it's nice to have, we have really got to look at how we get our return on investment on those particular products and on those particular services and those particular assets. We don't do that and haven't done that. Let's never think about, taking an asset out of the picture that is paying its own way. That's fine. And, so I think we just need to be more vigilant going forward. Council have already hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's no question. We look at what we have now. Is there anything we can sell? I mean, like, the Livingston Center or any assets we might have. Can we push the fire station out another 2 or 3 years and not look at putting another, 20, 30 million into something like that? There's so many questions we need to ask, and I don't know if we're asking or we're being vigilant about them, but we need to be. And, I don't think it's going to happen this time around, but we certainly need to be looking at it going forward. Those are my few comments, and I'll stick to them. We need to look at ROI on everything. And if it doesn't work, we shouldn't be doing it.
And just a point of clarification, the community center was 36 million.
All right. Sorry.
And there was an $18 million provincial grant that was put on that. And I have to commend council for spending extra money to make it a facility that we can enjoy for generations, not just get us up to where 2025 levels.
And my point, are you still there? My point was, we spent a lot of money on that center, and we keep looking at talking about assets and how much we're spending on assets, but not how much we're getting back from our assets. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Sharwa.
Through Mayor Jordan, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Again, it was 36 million. You've mentioned it was 42 million on several occasions, so I appreciate the clarification. $18 million grant. This is something that the community is very excited about. This is something that the community is going to use. So I think when we are talking about returns on investment, we also need to be considerate of the people that live here right now. How can we improve their quality of life? As opposed to, coming up with plans for people that don't actually even live in Grimsby. So I'm looking at that lens and trying to improve quality of life. So, I think we're going to debate a lot of these things in the future, but I think we need to be cognizant of the people that live here right now. Thank you.
Councillor DeVoldy.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. I'll really put on go to some other miscellaneous questions that I have. Could you just, we heard the tourism strategy report the other night, and one of the key matters in there that they said we could do quickly was wayfinding signage. Do we have that somewhere in the budget? We talked about it having minimal impact at the moment, but are there any plans for it as in our capital project or within any departmental budgets for any monies at all?
Sorry about that, through the mayor. Yeah, the project number is 745004. There is one in the, is it the operating or capital? In the capital budget. And there's also another one for park signage replacement, 600001.
Thank you. Then on another topic, just to clarify, and I'm going to go back to the bylaw enforcement officer. So this person has been working for us, but just not on a permanent full-time basis, which means their costs were funded by what? The levy in prior years? So we're just saying that, are we really just taking what I'll call a non-permanent full-time job and turning it into a permanent full-time job? Maybe you could just clarify that for me.
Certainly, yes, through the mayor. Last year, when we added it as temporary, we added the revenues that they would be bringing in along with the expenses for wages and benefits. So that was added last year. This year, we're just changing it from temporary to permanent, and that's why there's no levy impact.
Thank you. So yes, that was kind of how I understood it, that it was really going from a temporary full-time position really to a permanent full-time position. And that's why we stay where we are, basically. It has no impact. Thank you. And then I guess it's just a favorite concern of mine is always our reserve. So you had, and I don't have some of our finance reports immediately open, and so I'm going to ask to see how good your memory is too. But the stabilization reserve, we're talking about the potential for using that to fund the WSIB if we were to change from Schedule 2 to Schedule 1. How much do we have in it at the moment, and what plans do we have for it? Could you just refresh our memories on that one?
Yes, through the chair, I believe the balance there is between 3 and 4 million. Yeah, forecasted to be 2.9 million as of the end of the year. Thanks.
So I guess, that we keep circling back to our WSIB problem, which is a problem. And the question is of risk, right? And how we address the risk the fastest. If we continue as a Schedule 2 employer and continue to, fund the differences each year as they happen to us, we run the risk of something big hitting us, and then we're stuck with it, right? As opposed to quickly moving, even sooner than we're contemplating, to be a Schedule 1 employer. There are still risks there, but I guess the risk is, I'll say, minimized because we now ride the averages of everybody else rather than being the only person standing in the field all alone, right? So I will say that I am, definitely in favor of getting out from Schedule 2 sooner rather than later.
Councillor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. So, Tony, debate the question of how much we've been putting in savings for asset management was brought up by my fellow councillor. When did the provincial asset management regulations come into effect, and when did the town of Grimsby adopt them? If you can just.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I might want to look at Brandon exactly, but I believe it was 2022 was the first core study that had to be completed, and then in 2024, the study had to be completed for the remaining assets, and then in 2025, earlier this year, that had to incorporate levels of service. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
No, I think you got it right. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. So it backs up before that. There was an act that came out maybe 2019, 2020, and there was a bunch of, different milestones that we had to meet. So backing up from this year was our full asset management plan. A year prior was the asset management plan for, was it core, non-core? And then core and then non-core. and then prior to that, it was non-core or vice versa. And so there was about 4 or 5 hurdles that we had to make. So it was a multi-year project over 4 or 5 years at the least.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mayor. So it's relatively new as of the last few years. And these plans create, in essence, a paper funding gap that didn't necessarily exist before because there was no requirement to do an asset management approach to the way we did things before. So because they're based on replacement cost models, not actual conditions or historical practice. I'm not debating like why we're doing it because I agree with it, but I just want people to understand that the reason why the town of Grimsby didn't previously use that model is because nobody used that model in the past. The model is a relatively new one. Grimsby, in fact, has maintained strong infrastructure performance. Our public works, our park staff has done a phenomenal job at maintaining parks and infrastructure over those years. So while the asset management report shows a $5 million gap, which I understand we need to move towards, that figure doesn't mean the town's been neglectful. And you can disagree with me, Tony, but it's kind of a question that I'm asking you. It means that the new standard requires forecasting and funding replacement at a theoretical life cycle rather than the way that we did it before was this thing needs to be replaced. And we had long-term budgets. Our public works budgets often went 25 years into the future. If you look through the binder and look through it was always interesting to see what was coming down the pipes, but it wasn't necessary and legally required for the town to do that in the past. So I think it's important to understand so I understand Councillor Davoli's concerns, but they're based on relatively new ideas. And Councillor Davoli, if you want to pay more taxes, you're welcome to make a donation to the town of Grimsby. But I can tell you that when I speak to people, they're overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed by taxes. Not everybody is in the same financial position that we are. And when we make these decisions, they have to be based on what's good for everybody, not just what's good for me. Anyway, I have a question regarding the staffing, the $185,000 for the rec center, Mayor. So, Tony, you kind of talked about it in one of your slides, about how that was going to be broken down and where that money was going to go, and that $100,000 was coming from new revenue. Is there new programming that's being offered? Because when we closed the Livingston Activity Center, part of the promise was that there was going to be some consolidation. So $185,000 in increased staffing doesn't show me consolidation. It shows me that there's probably something new. So I didn't get that out of the presentation. So if that could be explained, how that cost is broken down, that would help me kind of get my head around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, through the mayor, I'll start and maybe and Sarah can add on. So, yeah, you're right. There's $185,000 we're proposing for staffing. That would be about 4 to 6 part-time staff at the Peach King Center. There would also be additional non-staff expenses for the bigger facility, like cleaning, maintenance, utilities, things like that, of $95,000. Those additional expenses are being offset by $247,000 in additional revenues through programming, additional programming for more programming that's going to be taking place, room rentals, as well as additional membership fees, and also offset by the sponsorship revenue that we'll be getting on that facility. If Sarah wants to add anything.
Through the mayor, I can just add a few comments. Tony, I think, summarized it well. One thing I want to mention is the Peach King Center is open 7 days a week, 6 a.m. till midnight, basically. So if we were to add even one person to support the new building, which is a substantial size, you can see the size of the footprint, and certainly it's going to need more help, that would be the equivalent of 4 full-time people, just by virtue of the number of hours that were open. So I think that's an important reminder to consider. So the way we've built this is to have some of that resource go into part-time staff that will support that building. It's less than a person for all of the time for that entire new facility. It's not enough, to be honest, and we're going to find a way to make it work. The other part of it is our programming. So if we do additional fitness courses, if we do additional camp programs, and some of the various things that we know we're hearing a strong demand for, some of those wages are buried into that too, and then are tied into the revenue. In terms of the consolidating, we absolutely are doing that. The only dedicated staff at the LAC is our front desk person, and they are coming over, and that is being put in there, but it isn't a high amount of direct staff in that facility.
Last question through you, Mayor. So I'm getting old, and if I forgot, then I apologize. But when we dealt with the Peach King Center budget and the expansion of the Peach King Center, was the expansion of staff discussed in the new Peach King Center build? And because then, I mean, we're just doing what we said we were going to do. And if I missed it, then I want to admit my fault, you know, like if I missed that back then. So if that wasn't mentioned back then, and if so, then it should pretty much be a continuation of that, from that approach.
Through the mayor, it was back in 2019, because that's how far back this goes. So it wasn't your term even. Yes, we did have to do some business case to state where that was. And again, keep in mind that was also 6 years ago, and we are falling in line with what we had said.
So I do want to point out that I wasn't on council at that time, so I didn't forget. I appreciate that, Sarah. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions, again, thank you for your explanation, Tony and senior staff. Moved by Councillor Howe, second by Councillor Charwa. Resolved that report FIN 25-57, 2026 Consolidated Budget Report dated November 10th, 2025 be received. All in favor? And that's carried. Can I have a mover and seconder for the confirming bylaw? Moved by Councillor Charwa, second by Councillor Howe. Moved by Councillor Charwa, second by Councillor Howe. Resolved that leave be given to introduce bylaw 25-65 and that same be read a first time, considered and passed. All in favor? And that's carried. Good evening, everyone. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good night.